Okay, hey, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. To have a really cool comparison for you guys from Vero Watch Company. A little about them. They were founded back in 2015 and they're out of Portland, Oregon. Vero watches are inspired by grit, commitment, and style, making it their mission to inspire life's journeys with rugged, unique field watches. And these are their venture into divers. Some key common characteristics inside when you're looking for a dive watch. Of course, you're going to find water resistance typically through some type of screw down crown. You're going to something that's tough, legible with a dive time bezel, and a diver's extension is always nice if on bracelet. We're looking at their open water model in the 38 as well as the 41. And these are two different colorway options as well. We have the Swell on the 38, and for the 41, we have the Dawn Patrol. The Swell was recently they did a small resupply, so they are available, and not just this colorway, but others as well. And then for the Open Water 41, this is the Dawn Patrol, currently sold out, but you can register for notifications on that. And there's also an orange dial variation that actually is restocked for the 41 if you wanted to pull the trigger that much faster. Essentially, Vero, I've reviewed a couple of their models in the past. They reached out to me recently. They talked about the little restock that was coming and, asked if there's anything that interested me. And I thought, hey, why not compare these two, which I hadn't seen before, comparing the two size options. And I thought this was going to be pretty straightforward. It's just going to be just comparing different sizes and which one looks better, or and what angle and on the wrist, right? But I learned a whole lot more about this brand, and that these watches are actually very different at the 38 and the 41 millimeter sizing. So it's not just their sizes that are different. There's actually a lot of features that are different, as well as, you can tell just by looking at this that even design wise, they're quite different, right? Divers, 60-minute bezel versus a traveler's 12-hour bezel. Even the indices are quite different. So, and then that's just the stuff that stands out. Everything's different, honestly. It's not just one is the smaller version of the other or one is the larger version of the other. They're actually, I think, quite different. So I'm looking forward to sharing with you all what those differences are. So let's go ahead and zoom the camera out, get these pieces in hand, and take a closer look. Okay, now, of course, there's things that they have in common, and there's things that are quite different about these two watches. And let's take the opportunity to really pay attention to what's different here. First, we'll start off with the dimensions because that's the most straightforward thing. We got a 38 millimeter versus a 41. We have a 10.7 versus an 11 millimeter thickness. We have a 45.9 or about 46 millimeter lug to lug versus a about 48 millimeter lug to lug at 47.9. And these are from my own caliper measurements. That's typically how I do. I don't just try to, copy and paste on what's posted because different brands do things differently. Some things that they have in common, of course, is going to be that matte media blasting, although I will say that the 38 millimeter model has more of a dull aesthetic to it, more matted versus here you have a little bit more of a sheen to that blasted finish. They're both matte blasted, but again, there's a difference there. Also, something that they have in common is going to be these screw down crowns. They are both screw down. They both have knurling, and, very similar in design in terms of the crown guards and everything like that. And also in terms of the crown, there's no ghost position. And even though these are both date-only watches, and they're both powered by automatic Sellita SW200s. They have 38 hours of power reserve, beat at 4 hertz in terms of their beat rate, or 28,800 vibrations per hour. And they're actually both regulated to plus or minus 5 seconds per day in 6 positions, which is something I didn't know about these watches, that they took their timing so seriously. That is chronometer standard. No, it's not chronometer grade, but it is tuned to a standard. That is outstanding. Plus or minus 5 seconds per day in 6 positions. I love that. I loved learning about that. In terms of the price point differences, $795 versus $890. And that is kind of common for typically the larger watch to cost more. But I will say the water gets a little bit muddy because there are certain features that some may lean more towards the 38 versus the 41, even though the 41 is more expensive. Also 18 millimeter lug versus 20 millimeter lug. But what else? 12-hour traveler's bezel, right? Still 60 click. They both are 60 click bezels. Great action. Love how audible and tactile the clicks are. So very, very nice for both of them in terms of that bezel action. But there are different types of bezels, right? You have a traveler's bezel here, which is 12 hours. You have 60-minute bezel here for the divers, right? For dive timing, as well as timing really anything by the minute. They both have 200 meters of water resistance or 20 atmospheres. And I think that's, also they have coated bezels, but this one is Cerakoted versus this one being DLC. And then in terms of the price difference, $95 difference between the two, with the larger one being more expensive than the smaller one. And then we have also screw pins in the 38, which we can see here, versus pin and collar in the 41. And then we have also 5 positions of Toolless Micro-adjust thanks to this Node X clasp here, as you guys can see. So there's a nice amount of flexibility there for you. You could use it as diver's extension, or you can use it for manual, or I should say on the fly micro adjustment, or you have the manual micro adjustment holes here. So they are different again. And this is, instead of it being a push button, this is going to be friction fit with a fold over locking clasp. Still all milled and everything from here. But here's going to be 3 positions versus the more advanced 5 positions of Toolless Micro-adjustment. Also, you're going to see female end links here on the 38 versus male end links here on the 41. Also, you're going to see quick release spring bars here on that 38. If I can get the camera to focus, let's do that. There we go. So you're going to have that quick release, of course, versus here, standard. So traditional spring bars. And then you're also going to notice a 3-link setup, right? But these are fixed links. You can see it's basically in a Y shape. There's no additional articulation besides those joints there. But here you're going to have fully articulated. Check that out. So if you wanted to do the little stack test, you could do it with the 41. So again, it's not as straightforward as one is smaller and, or one is cheaper and one is more expensive. There are some trade-offs. In terms of what these watches remind me of and that are a little bit more mainstream, I'd say, think Notice, think Boulder, put them together, and this reminds me of that in terms of the build quality, the fit and finish, which that's great company to be in because those are 2 great brands. I do think that aesthetically, these are very refreshing. But with that said, let's actually get them on the wrist and compare how they wear. Okay, as you can see on my 7.5-inch wrist, or 19 centimeters in circumference, that 41 fits nice. Full size diver, definitely not oversized. Some will appreciate that look, but then some will appreciate the smaller one here. And of course, it does throw off the visual weight a bit because here you have a matching bezel and dial setup, so it's going to give you something that feels a bit more expansive, but overall the actual physical footprint is going to be much smaller. You can see something that they have in common is how incredibly thin they both are, which is nice because they do have very solid and reliable sleeve movements inside, and these aren't the thinner 300 series, these are the 200, so nice and robust, especially for shock resistance and everything like that. And the fact that they were able to engineer these to still have 200 meters of water resistance and still be this thin at under, or at 11 millimeters or under, I think that's really pretty outstanding. And of course, if I get my wrist a bit too close to the camera lens here, you notice quite a bit of perspective distortion. It's going to make even the smaller watch seem a lot larger because the sides of my wrist are falling away, and thus the sides of the bracelet. So what I'll do is keep my wrist nice and low and then just tighten up the frame here so that you guys can get still a detailed look, but just add a bit of a truer aspect ratio as to how this may lay on your own wrist. And as you guys can see, again, full size, but look at how flat and thin that is. I love the curvature, the undercutting, very comfortable. even with the elongated ultimate lug to lug because of that male end link. You can see it has a nice drape and flow to it. Very natural. There's not a lot of pockets of space there. And it does, again, lay very flat and nice there, which, you know, some might make and internalize that as saying it wears a little bit larger because it's thin and wide and expansive, right? So if you don't want that and you maybe have a smaller wrist, something like this with this thinness is going to work out quite nice. This is not my, you know, favorite in terms of colorways. It's kind of like tennis ball green. But hey, if you're into tennis, that's very cool. Or if you're into a change and you really want something just kind of bright and fun, I think this works for that, you know. So again, not quite my cup of tea, but the execution, guys, look at the dial. Look at those indices. Beautifully applied, very sharply executed. Again, I love the action. The sound, the feel, very nice. Same here. These are impressive. So, I mean, between the fact that the bezel action is so good and then that the timing is so dialed in, again, this is really cool. Little surprises for me. But with that said, let's go ahead, get these off the wrist, set up for some Lume shots, low light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. Ooh, very nice Lume. As you guys can see, even differ a bit in the Lume execution. You have the BGW9 as well as what looks like probably more of a C3 there, blue versus green. Of course, on that dive time bezel, you're going to get quite a bit more indexing there that's going to be illuminated versus on the 12-hour Travelers a bit less. And then you're going to also notice that the Lume on the second sand is executed differently. But one thing I always like to work in is going to be a bit of a light transition. And as you can see, guys, what this makes up for an absolute pitch black darkness in terms of that 38 millimeter in this colorway. Of course, other colorways are going to perform differently. It's hugely legible. I mean, even with barely any light there, that tennis ball green, absolutely, it's not luminescent, which is crazy, but the way that it captures light is really, really interesting. So I do like to work in that low light transition because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to find stuff coming out of buildings, walking underneath overhangs, or just hanging out underneath the shade of a tree. So it's nice to see what these colors, textures, and finishes run alike in less than optimal lighting. And as you guys can see here, of course, there's not too much to pay attention to in terms of that finishing because it all is, you know, matte blasted. So it's just gonna look quite uniform, quite clean, quite serene. But the dials themselves are very, very nice. Really great legibility, very, very handsome, quite cool, unoffensive. Maybe they don't stand out as much. They're not as daring as, you know, a design that you might see from other brands. But at the same time, they're way less busy, which is nice. So I think there's a nice balance to that in terms of the fact that they do have a clean minimalist aesthetic, and they are not, you know, super loud, but they still do have a good amount of visual interest and play. So what I like to do now is let's get to the closing thoughts, guys. So for me, guys, you know, going over some of those differences, you know, these are quite different watches, although they do share a lot in common. But for me, guys, bottom line, the Open Water Diver is a breath of fresh air in a sea of vintage-inspired divers with its modern aesthetics that don't waste time trying too hard just to be different. It's a clean and simple design that feels minimalist without ever approaching boring. In terms of sizing options, the two models are actually quite different, even apart from their sizing parameters. Would it be nice if they just had one Goldilocks model that kind of split the difference in size while taking the best features of both? I'd say, yeah, absolutely. But then you'd have less options, and an abundance of options are really a cornerstone of what make Microbrand watches so cool in the first place. So it's kind of part of the formula. It's baked in. Who knows, maybe in the future they could go to a 40 or a 39 millimeter model that kind of does it all, and you just choose you know, what type of bezel you want, but it'll just have the best of each of these. That could be cool too, but let me know what you think down in the comments below, because there are some of you that probably would never wear the 38 and would only wear the 41, and vice versa. And some people would only want a 12-hour bezel, while others might only want a 60-minute timer traditionally. So with all that said, let me know what you all think down in the comments below. If you like the video, please do a like, and if you're already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.